For Julian Croft, a man who built a global tech empire on cold, hard data, the truth was the only currency he trusted. He lived in a world of absolutes of binary code and predictable outcomes. But the one truth he thought was sacred, the lineage of his infant son Leo, was about to unravel not just his multi-million-dollar marriage, but the very fabric of his reality. He filed for divorce, armed with the certainty of a CEO and a non-negotiable demand for a DNA test. The results would indeed come, but they wouldn't expose an unfaithful wife. They would expose a secret so profound, a truth so medically impossible, it would force him and his wife to question everything they ever knew about love biology and the child they both adored. The penthouse overlooked Central Park, a sprawling kingdom of green and grey laid out 70 floors below. From this vantage point, the city's relentless symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the perpetual hum of traffic, was muted to a respectful whisper. This was Julian Croft's world, a fortress of steel, glass, and silence that he had meticulously built for himself. At 42, Julian possessed the kind of restless energy that had allowed him to forge a billion-dollar software company, Croft Core, from a garage in Silicon Valley 2 decades ago. He was a man who understood systems, who saw life as a series of algorithms. You input the right data, you get the desired result. His wife, Isabella Rossi, was supposed to be his most perfect acquisition. They met at a gallery in Soho, where she was a curator. She was everything his life of code and boardrooms was not: warm, effusive, with a laugh that seemed to fill the sterile emptiness of his minimalist apartment. She spoke of art with a passion he usually reserved for quarterly earnings reports. Julian, a man who had everything, found himself wanting the one thing he couldn't quantify: her light. Their romance was a whirlwind, a publicist's dream. The stoic tech mogul swept off his feet by the fiery Italian-American art expert. Their wedding was an opulent affair at a villa on Lake Como, a carefully curated event that felt more like a merger than a marriage. For 2 years, their life was a glossy magazine spread, and then came their greatest project, a child. It hadn't been easy. The path to parenthood was a brutal clinical gauntlet of appointments, injections, and soul-crushing disappointments. They had turned to the most exclusive fertility clinic in New York City, the Genesis Center, a place that promised miracles for a price. After 3 grueling rounds of in vitro fertilization, their miracle arrived. Leo was 6 months old now, a gurgling, beautiful baby with wide, curious eyes and a tuft of downy brown hair. Isabella was a natural mother. She had given up her career without a second thought, her world shrinking to the dimensions of the nursery, and she had never seemed happier. Her love for Leo was a fierce, all-consuming force that Julian watched with a mixture of admiration and a strange, unsettling detachment. The detachment had started subtly. It was a quiet hum of discord beneath the surface of their perfect life. It began with a stray comment. "It's strange," Julian had said one evening, scrolling through old family photos on a tablet while Isabella rocked Leo to sleep. "My baby pictures. I had this shock of blonde hair, stick straight, and blue eyes, bluer than the Caribbean." Isabella had smiled, her eyes still fixed on their son. "Genetics are a lottery, darling. He has my brown eyes, my hair. Maybe he'll get your business sense, and we'll have the perfect combination." But for Julian, it wasn't a lottery. It was a data point that didn't compute. He started observing Leo with an unnerving intensity. He'd study the curve of the baby's ears, the shape of his nose, the tiny whorls of his fingerprints. He downloaded genetic inheritance charts, cross-referencing his own dominant and recessive traits with Isabella's. His best friend and Croft Corps' COO, Marcus Thorne, noticed the change during one of their weekly squash games. Julian's usual ruthless precision on the court was gone, replaced by a distracted, simmering frustration. "Everything all right?" Jules Marcus asked, as they toweled off. "You seem a million miles away." Julian slammed his racket into his gym bag. "It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." "Trouble in paradise?" Julian hesitated the words, tasting like poison on his tongue. "Do you think Leo looks like me?" Marcus was taken aback. "What, he's a baby?" "He looks like a baby. He's got Isabella's coloring, maybe. Who cares? He's a great kid. Everyone says that." "He has Isabella's coloring." "No one ever says he looks like me." "Not one person," Julian said, his voice low and tight. The algorithm in his head was malfunctioning. The inputs were his DNA, his wife's DNA. The output should be a child bearing a recognizable trace of him. But the output this beautiful baby boy felt. Alien. The doubt began as a whisper in the back of his mind, a single line of corrupted code. But in the sterile silence of his glass fortress, the whisper was starting to sound like a scream. He started coming home later, retreating to his study, the one room in the penthouse that Isabella rarely entered. It was his sanctuary of logic, filled with monitors displaying fluctuating market data. Here the world made sense. But outside that door, in the warmth of the home Isabella had created, lay a profound and terrifying uncertainty. One night, Isabella found him staring into Leo's crib long after the baby had fallen asleep. There was no fatherly adoration on his face, only a cold, analytical scrutiny. "Julian, what are you doing?" she asked softly from the doorway. He flinched, startled. "Nothing. Just watching him." "You've been so distant lately," she said, her voice laced with a hurt she could no longer hide. "Is it work?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Isabella, when we were at the clinic, the IVF process, it's all very clinical, isn't it? A lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved." Isabella frowned, confused. "Yes. Nurses, doctors, embryologists. What about it?" "There's a margin for error in any system," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Human error. It's unavoidable." A cold dread began to seep into Isabella's bones. This wasn't about work. This was about something far more fundamental. "What are you trying to say, Julian?" He looked from her to the sleeping child in the crib, and his gaze was filled with a chilling suspicion. "I'm saying I need certainty. I need to know the truth." Isabella felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The man she loved, the man whose child she had carried and birthed, was looking at her as if she were a stranger, a variable in an equation that wasn't adding up. The gilded cage had never felt so cold. The demand, when it finally came, was not delivered in a moment of heated passion. It was presented with the cold, dispassionate finality of a business proposal. They were in the living room, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. Leo was asleep in his nursery, blissfully unaware of the fault line that was about to rupture his world. Julian slid a folder across the polished marble coffee table. Isabella stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a legal document, not yet. It was a brochure for a DNA diagnostics lab. "I've made an appointment for next Tuesday," Julian stated. Not asked. It's a simple cheek swab. For you, me, and Leo. We'll have the results in 48 hours. Then we can put this to rest. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. The sheer calculated audacity of it stole her breath. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not her husband, but a stranger, a paranoid, obsessive man she didn't recognize. Put this to rest. She repeated, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You think a test is going to fix what you've already broken? You are questioning my fidelity, Julian. You are questioning the very foundation of our marriage, our family. You are questioning me. I'm questioning a data anomaly, he retorted, his voice clipped and precise. The child does not resemble me. It's a logical inconsistency that needs to be resolved. He is not a data anomaly. He is our son, she cried, jumping to her feet. He is the son I carried for 9 months. The son I went through hell and back for with needles and hormones and heartbreak. How dare you reduce all of that to a logical inconsistency? The IVF process is exactly my point. He countered, his own voice rising, the cool veneer cracking. It's a black box, Isabella. We hand over our biological material, and we trust a team of strangers to handle it correctly. You have no idea what happens behind those lab doors. I'm a systems analyst. I know that any system can be compromised. His words were a special kind of cruelty. He wasn't just accusing her of infidelity. He was devaluing the very experience of pregnancy and childbirth that had defined the last year of her life, framing it as a potentially flawed manufacturing process. So this isn't just about me cheating, she said, a bitter realization dawning. This is about some insane conspiracy theory where the most respected fertility clinic in the country somehow. What swapped your sample is that I'm not proposing a theory. I'm seeking data to form a conclusion, he said stubbornly. If the test proves he's my son, I will be the first to admit I was wrong. I will apologize, and we will move on. Move on. She let out a hollow laugh. There is no moving on from this, Julian. You don't get to light a fire to our home and then apologize for the ashes. The trust is gone. What you are suggesting is unforgivable. She refused. Absolutely, unequivocally refused. It was a matter of principle. Submitting to the test felt like an admission of guilt, a validation of his disgusting suspicion. Her refusal only cemented his belief that she was hiding something. The penthouse became a battlefield of Arctic silences and whispered, venomous arguments behind closed doors. Isabella threw herself into caring for Leo with a desperate ferocity, as if her love could form a shield around him. Julian, in turn, retreated further into his work, his interactions with his son becoming strained and rare. He saw the bond between Isabella and Leo, a seamless, innate connection, and in his paranoid state, he interpreted it as a conspiracy of 2 against 1. He felt like an outsider in his own home. 2 weeks after his initial demand, Julian made his final move. Isabella was feeding Leo in the sun-drenched breakfast nook when the doorbell chimed. Their housekeeper, Maria, answered it. A moment later, a man in a crisp suit stood in the archway, a leather satchel in his hand. Isabella Croft, he asked, his tone professionally neutral. Yes. He stepped forward and handed her a thick manila envelope. You've been served. Isabella's blood ran cold. She didn't need to open it. She knew. Her hands trembled as she tore the seal. The words leaped off the page, stark and brutal in their legalese. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She scanned the text, her vision blurring with tears. And then she saw the grounds, the reason cited for the divorce, and a choked sob escaped her lips. Irreconcilable differences arising from the petitioner's discovery of fraud pertaining to the paternity of the child Leo Croft. Fraud. He had called her a fraud. He had called their son a fraud. It was a declaration of war. He hadn't just filed for divorce. He had publicly, legally branded her an adulteress and their child illegitimate. The document also contained a motion to compel a DNA test, a financial restraining order, freezing their joint assets, and a demand for sole custody of Leo once paternity was clarified. He had built a fortress of glass and steel around her, and now he was systematically demolishing it, leaving her with nothing but the rubble. She looked from the papers in her hand to the innocent baby in his high chair, babbling and smearing sweet potato on his face. He was the only thing that mattered. Her first call was not to a friend or her family, but to the fiercest divorce attorney she had ever heard of, a woman named Eleanor Vance. As she explained the situation, her voice breaking, she realized Julian had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought his logic and his wealth made him invincible. He had pushed her into a corner, but he had forgotten one thing about Isabella Rossi. She was a mother, and he had just threatened her child. The unraveling was complete. Now the fight would begin. Eleanor Vance's office was the antithesis of Julian's world. It was located in a historic brownstone in the West Village, filled with overflowing bookshelves, antique furniture, and the scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. Eleanor herself was in her late 50s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that missed nothing, and a reputation for being a formidable strategist, with a surprising well of empathy. Isabella sat across from her, the divorce papers laid out between them, like a formal surrender. She had recounted the entire story, from the first unsettling comment to the brutal arrival of the process server. Eleanor listened patiently, her fingers steepled. When Isabella finished, her voice raw, the lawyer leaned forward. "He's a bully, Mrs. Croft. A very wealthy, very intelligent bully. And bullies, no matter how sophisticated, operate on one principle: intimidation. This document," she said, tapping the petition, "is designed to make you panic, to make you feel powerless, and to force you to capitulate to his demand for the paternity test." "I won't do it," Isabella said, the defiance returning to her voice. "It's a violation. I understand that." "Emotionally, it's a profound betrayal," Eleanor said calmly. "But legally and strategically, your refusal is hurting you. In family court, a refusal to take a paternity test when paternity is in question is often viewed as an indication that you have something to hide. His lawyers will paint you as deceptive. It gives him leverage. So I have to let him win?" Isabella asked, her heart sinking. "No, we are not going to let him win. We are going to take his weapon and turn it against him," Eleanor said, a glint in her eye. "We will agree to the test." Isabella stared at her. "But—" "On our terms," Eleanor continued, cutting her off. "We will file a response. We will agree to the DNA test contingent on it being performed by a neutral court-appointed lab with representatives from both legal teams present to witness the sample collection. We will state for the record that you are doing this under duress to protect your child from the cloud of illegitimacy your husband has created. We will frame this not as you surrendering, but as a mother taking the necessary steps to clear her name and secure her child's future. We will make him look like the paranoid, controlling aggressor." For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a flicker of hope. Eleanor's strategy was brilliant. It shifted the narrative. She wasn't a cornered wife anymore. She was a proactive mother fighting back. The next week was a blur of legal maneuvering. Eleanor's response was filed, and as predicted, Julian's high-powered legal team at Sterling, Lynch and Associates was momentarily thrown off balance. Their lead attorney, a notoriously aggressive litigator named Robert Sterling, had expected a protracted fight over the test itself. By agreeing, Isabella had neutralized his primary line of attack. A court date was set not for a hearing, but for the sample collection itself. It was to take place in a sterile conference room at a neutral mediation center. The days leading up to it were the longest of Isabella's life. She and Julian continued to live in the penthouse, their home now carved into hostile territories. They communicated only through clipped, formal text messages, mostly regarding Leo's schedule. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Every time Isabella looked at Leo, a wave of protectiveness washed over her, so fierce it was painful. This test was a formality to her. She knew she had been faithful. She knew Leo was Julian's son. She had carried him, felt his every kick, and stared into his eyes every day for 6 months. There was no doubt in her soul. The pain came from Julian's willingness to believe a phantom suspicion over the woman he had vowed to love and trust. The night before the test, Isabella couldn't sleep. She walked into the nursery and stood over Leo's crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. Her son. In less than 24 hours, a piece of paper would officially confirm what her heart had known all along. And then the real battle would begin, deciding if a marriage so thoroughly poisoned by doubt could ever be saved. As she stood there, a memory surfaced. A small, insignificant detail from their time at the Genesis Center. It was the day of the embryo transfer, the most hopeful and nerve-wracking day of the entire IVF process. They had been in a private recovery room when a nurse had come in to check on her. The nurse was older, with tired eyes and a slightly harried demeanor. She had been complaining under her breath about being short-staffed, about a new computer system that was causing chaos with the labeling protocols. Everything is double-triple-checked. Of course, the nurse whose name tag read Brenda had reassured them with a thin smile. But this new software, it's a headache, thinks it's smarter than we are. At the time, Isabella had dismissed it as the casual grumbling of an overworked employee. But now, in the chilling context of Julian's accusations, the memory felt different. It was a tiny crack in the pristine facade of the infallible clinic. Human error. Any system can be compromised. Julian's words echoed in her mind. She shook her head, trying to banish the thought. It was ridiculous. A clinic of that caliber wouldn't make a mistake of that magnitude. Her mind was just grasping at straws infected by Julian's paranoia. This was about infidelity. That was the accusation on the table. Nothing else. The next day she dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. She was not a victim. She was Isabella Rossi, and she was going to reclaim her life. With Eleanor by her side, she walked into the mediation center, her head held high. Julian was already there with Robert Sterling. He looked tired, the strain of the last few weeks etched on his face. He wouldn't meet her eyes. A court-appointed administrator and a technician from the lab were present. The room was cold, clinical, and silent. The process was quick and deeply humiliating. The technician took a swab from inside Julian's cheek, then from hers. Finally, Eleanor held Leo in her arms while the technician gently swabbed the inside of the baby's mouth. Leo, startled, began to cry. The sound echoed in the tense silence of the room, a pure, innocent protest against the cold adult world that was failing him. The samples were sealed, labeled, and placed into a locked case. The results will be delivered concurrently to both legal counsels in 72 hours, the administrator announced. 3 days. In 3 days, the war would be over. Or so Isabella thought. She had no idea that the verdict she was waiting for would not be the end of the war, but the beginning of an entirely new and far more terrifying one. The truth was coming, but it was a truth that no one in that room could have ever conceived. The 72 hours felt like a lifetime suspended in amber. Isabella stayed with her sister Chloe, unable to bear the oppressive silence of the penthouse. Chloe's small, cluttered apartment in Brooklyn was a world away from the sterile luxury Isabella had grown accustomed to. It was filled with life chaos and unwavering support. "He's a monster," Bella Chloe said for the 100th time, bouncing a fussy Leo on her hip. "When this is over, you take that baby. You take half of everything that monster owns and you build a new life." Isabella wished it were that simple. Despite the anger and the betrayal, a part of her still mourned the man she had married, the life they were supposed to have. On the 3rd day, the call came. It was Eleanor Vance. Her voice was steady, but Isabella detected an unusual, unreadable tone beneath the professional calm. "The results are in, Isabella. They've been emailed to my office and to Mr. Sterling's. Can you and Chloe come in? I think it's best we review this together." The request for Chloe to be present sent a jolt of anxiety through Isabella. "Is everything okay? Just come to the office, Isabella. We'll talk here." The taxi ride to the West Village was a blur. Isabella held Leo tightly, his warmth a small comfort against the chilling dread that was creeping back in. In Eleanor's office, the air was thick with anticipation. Eleanor sat behind her desk, a single printed document placed face down in front of her. "Please sit," she said gently. Isabella and Chloe sat Leo now sleeping peacefully in his carrier at their feet. Eleanor took a deep breath. "As you know, the lab tested 2 things. First, the probability of paternity between Julian Croft and Leo. Second, as a control, the probability of maternity between you and Leo." She paused, her eyes meeting Isabella's. The results for Julian came back first. She flipped the paper over. Isabella's eyes darted to the bottom line, the bolded text. Probability of paternity set. The number was stark, absolute, a 0. Isabella stared at it, her mind refusing to process the information. It was impossible. A mistake. "No," she whispered. "That's wrong. The lab made a mistake. That's impossible." Isabella Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. "The legal standard for exclusion is 0%. Julian Croft is not Leo's biological father." Chloe gasped, reaching out to grab her sister's hand. "Bella." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. A torrent of emotions crashed over her: confusion, terror, a profound sense of violation. She hadn't cheated. She knew this with a certainty that was as real as her own heartbeat. So how could this be? Her mind raced, grasping for an explanation. The clinic, a mix-up. Julian's words came screaming back to her. A system can be compromised, but before she could even voice this chaotic thought, Eleanor spoke again. Her voice graver than before. "Isabella, there's something else. This is unprecedented in my career. I've never seen anything like this." She slid the paper across the desk. Isabella's gaze moved past the paternity section to the lines below it, the part she had assumed was a mere formality. Maternal analysis. Isabella Rossi. Genetic markers compared to child. Leo result. The alleged mother, Isabella Rossi, is excluded as the biological mother of the child, Leo. Probability of maternity, 0%. 0%. The words didn't register at first. They were just letters on a page, a sequence of characters that made no sense. Maternity, 0%. Excluded as the biological mother. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. Isabella's hearing faded to a dull roar. The patterns on Eleanor's antique rug swam before her eyes. The baby she carried inside her for 39 weeks. The baby she felt kick and hiccup. The baby whose birth was a searing, triumphant memory. The baby currently sleeping at her feet, whose scent she knew better than her own. He wasn't hers. A guttural sound escaped her throat, a sound of pure, primal agony. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of a soul being ripped in two. No. No. That's a lie. That is a lie. She screamed, lunging forward as if to tear the paper to shreds. Chloe caught her, holding her tight as Isabella began to sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. This is a mistake, a horrible mistake. I'm his mother. I am his mother. Eleanor Vance, for the first time in her unflappable career, looked utterly shaken. She rounded the desk, kneeling beside her client. Isabella, breathe. Just breathe. We are going to figure this out. At that exact moment across town, in a steel and glass conference room, Julian Croft and Robert Sterling were staring at an identical document. Julian had expected vindication. He had expected the 0% paternity result. He had steeled himself for the anger, the confrontation, the ugly but necessary end to his marriage. He was not prepared for the second 0. He read the line about the maternity results once then, twice then, a third time. The logic in his brain, the system on which his entire life was built, crashed. It was a fatal error from which there was no recovery. Fraud. He had accused her of fraud. He had imagined a simple, sordid affair. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a cosmic impossibility. The baby he had rejected, the child he had refused to bond with, because he didn't see himself in his eyes, wasn't biologically his. But he also wasn't Isabella's. The woman he had called a liar and a cheat was a victim of something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He looked at the hard, triumphant face of his lawyer, who was already strategizing his next move. "This is incredible," Sterling was saying. "This changes everything. We can annul the marriage claim. She was never the mother. This is a clean—" "Shut up," Julian said, his voice quiet but laced with a new, terrifying emotion. Dread. "Just shut up." He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city below. For the first time, his fortress felt like a prison. He had wanted the truth. He had waged a war for a single piece of data. And now he had it. The truth wasn't a weapon that had won him the war. It was a bomb that had detonated in the center of all their lives, vaporizing everything: their anger, their accusations, their entire reality. He and Isabella were no longer husband and wife, locked in a bitter divorce. They were two strangers bound together by a shared nightmare, and by the love they both felt for a child who, according to science, belonged to neither of them. The divorce proceedings didn't just halt. They evaporated. The petition, the motions, the accusations of fraud, they all became meaningless artifacts of a reality that no longer existed. Robert Sterling, sensing the seismic shift, attempted to call Julian, but his calls went to voicemail. Julian Croft had gone silent. The first communication came not from lawyer to lawyer, but from man to woman. A simple text message from Julian to Isabella, sent late the night of the reveal. "I am so sorry, Isabella. I was wrong. About everything. Please just tell me you and Leo are safe." Isabella, huddled in her sister's guest room and staring at her sleeping baby, read the message through a haze of tears. The apology felt distant, hollow. Sorry couldn't stitch back the reality that had been torn apart. She didn't reply. The following morning, Eleanor Vance went on the offensive. This was no longer a divorce case. It was a potential criminal investigation and a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. She assembled a team, a private investigator, a medical law specialist, and a press relations expert to manage the inevitable media storm. Their target was singular, the Genesis Center. "They will try to bury this," Eleanor explained to Isabella and Chloe in her office, which had become their war room. "They'll offer a settlement demand, a non-disclosure agreement, and try to make this go away quietly. We will not let them." "There is another family out there, Isabella. A family that has your biological child. And you have theirs. We have to find them." The thought was a new, fresh wave of agony. Somewhere in the world, another woman was raising her baby. Her biological son or daughter. Did they look like Julian? Did they have his blonde hair and blue eyes? And the Garcias, the hypothetical other family, were they searching too? Or were they blissfully unaware, loving the child that was biologically Isabella's? The complexity of it was a crushing weight. The investigation began with a formal records request, citing the DNA evidence. The Genesis Center's initial response was a wall of corporate legalese and denial. They claimed their protocols were infallible. But behind the scenes, panic was setting in. The PI, a former NYPD detective named Frank Russo, began the painstaking work of backgrounding the clinic's employees. He focused on the staff who were on duty on the day of Isabella's embryo transfer, and one name quickly rose to the top of the list: Brenda, the senior embryologist. The same nurse whose comments about the faulty software had stuck in Isabella's memory. Russo's digging uncovered that Brenda had been passed over for a promotion 2 months before the Crofts' procedure. He also found something more compelling. Her daughter had been on a waiting list for donor embryos at a low-cost clinic for years, her infertility a source of deep family pain. Brenda was a woman surrounded by the daily miracles she provided for the wealthy while her own family suffered. It was a powerful, potentially dangerous emotional cocktail. While the investigation unfolded, Julian reappeared. He didn't come to the penthouse. He came to Chloe's apartment in Brooklyn. When Isabella opened the door, she saw a man utterly changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haunted, desperate look. "Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I have no right. But can I see him?" She wanted to slam the door in his face. She wanted to scream at him for what he had done. But looking at his broken expression, she saw not the monster who had served her divorce papers, but a man as lost and terrified as she was. And she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that Julian's connection to Leo wasn't severed by that DNA report. He was Leo's father in every way that mattered, except for the one he had prized most. She stepped aside and let him in. He walked slowly towards the playpen, where Leo was sitting, babbling at a set of colorful rings. Julian knelt down, his expensive suit looking out of place on Chloe's worn hardwood floor. He didn't touch the baby, just looked at him. For the first time, His gaze held no suspicion, no cold analysis. It held only regret and a profound, aching love. "His name is Leo Julian," said quietly, as if introducing himself. "Your name is Leo." From that day on, an uneasy truce formed. Julian didn't try to reclaim his home or his wife. He used his immense resources to aid the investigation. He hired his own team of forensic accountants to tear through the Genesis Center's financials, looking for any sign of a cover-up. He and Isabella were no longer fighting each other. They were fighting a common enemy, a shared, impossible truth. The breakthrough came a week later. Under the immense pressure of the impending lawsuit, a junior lab technician at the Genesis Center broke. She confessed to Frank Russo that she had seen Brenda acting strangely on the day of the Crofts' transfer. She had seen her stay late, working near the cryogenic storage tanks, long after her shift had ended, muttering about balancing the scales. Armed with this testimony, Eleanor and Russo confronted Brenda at her home in Queens. At first, she denied everything. But as Eleanor laid out the evidence, the timeline, the witness statement, the devastating DNA report, the older woman crumbled. Sobbing at her kitchen table, Brenda told them everything. It wasn't about a software glitch or a random mistake. It was deliberate. On that day, 2 sets of embryos were being prepared for transfer. The Crofts' A-grade, genetically perfect specimens from a wealthy, powerful couple, and the Garcias' another couple who had been trying for years their last viable embryo only, a B-grade. Brenda knew the Garcias. They weren't famous or rich. They were a school teacher and a fireman from Staten Island. In a moment of what she described as misguided, maddening pity, she had made a decision. She had looked at the 2 petri dishes side by side. The Crofts had everything, she reasoned. They could try again and again. The Garcias. This was their last shot. I didn't think of it as stealing. She wept, her face buried in her hands. I thought of it as a gift. I was giving their baby a better chance, a stronger embryo. I thought I was helping God. She had swapped them. With a steady hand, she had taken the petri dish labeled Croft and placed it on the tray destined for Mrs. Garcia. And the one labeled Garcia went to Isabella. She had falsified the logs, relying on the chaos of the new computer system to cover her tracks. She never thought anyone would find out. Who would ever think to run a maternal DNA test on a mother who had given birth? Isabella listened to the relayed confession in stunned silence. Her son, the child she had nourished and loved, was named Mateo Garcia. And her biological child, a boy, was being raised by a fireman and a school teacher in Staten Island. He was named Daniel. The hunt for the truth was over. But a new, even more agonizing journey was about to begin. How do you untangle 2 families, 2 lives, 2 sons bound together by a secret swap in a sterile lab? The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, Eleanor Vance's office. It was the most difficult, heart-wrenching meeting any of them would ever attend. Julian and Isabella arrived first, a united but fragile front. They had spent days in a state of shock, barely speaking, simply coexisting in their shared grief and confusion. Then Mariah and David Garcia arrived. They were a handsome couple in their late 30s with the kind of open, honest faces that immediately put one at ease. Maria was a kindergarten teacher with warm, expressive eyes, and David was a tall, solidly built fireman whose hands, though large, looked gentle. They radiated a nervous but palpable decency, and in Maria's arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a baby boy with a shock of blonde hair and eyes as blue as the Caribbean Sea. He was the spitting image of Julian's baby pictures. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Her biological son. Her Daniel. David Garcia, in turn, was holding a baby carrier. In it slept Mateo, the baby Isabella knew as Leo, with his dark hair and olive skin. He looked just like Maria. For a long moment, no one spoke. The two families stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by an invisible chasm of impossibility. The two babies, oblivious, were the bridges between them. Maria Garcia was the first to break the silence, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at Isabella. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We had no idea. He is so loved." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. I know she managed to say, her gaze fixed on the blonde baby in Maria's arms. "Our son, he is loved too." There were no easy answers. The lawyers could speak of legal rights and biological claims. But in that room, the four parents faced a reality that transcended law. They had each spent 6 months falling deeply and irrevocably in love with a child that was not by blood their own. To simply swap back felt like a brutal amputation of the soul. How could Isabella hand over the baby she had nursed and rocked to sleep every night? How could Maria give away the child whose every cry and coo she knew intimately? Over several more excruciatingly emotional meetings, a plan began to form. It was unconventional, messy, and without precedent, but it was forged from love. They would not swap the children. The bonds they had formed were too sacred to break. But they could not live in denial of the biology either. They decided to become a new kind of family. They sold their respective homes. Julian, in an act of profound atonement, bought a large duplex property in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn. The Garcias would live on one floor, and Isabella would live on the other. Julian, choosing to give Isabella her space, bought a smaller apartment nearby. Their lives became intricately, permanently entwined. The boys, Daniel and Mateo, would be raised as brothers. They would know the truth from the beginning in age-appropriate ways. They would have 4 parents who loved them. Weekends were spent together, holidays were a shared, chaotic affair. David taught Julian how to throw a baseball. Isabella and Maria bonded over their shared, unique journey of motherhood, finding solace and understanding in each other that no one else could provide. The marriage between Julian and Isabella was over. The trust had been shattered in a way that could never be fully repaired. But the anger had dissolved, replaced by a deep, complex, and respectful partnership. Julian's love for Mateo, they all agreed to keep the names the boys had been given, was no longer conditional on a DNA report. He was there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every milestone. He learned that fatherhood wasn't about genetics. It was about showing up. He also developed a tender uncle-like relationship with Daniel, his biological son, marveling at the tiny reflection of himself while respecting David's role as his father. The world saw a bizarre modern arrangement. But within the walls of their Brooklyn duplex, a fragile, beautiful ecosystem of love was thriving. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. It was messy, complicated, and often difficult. But it was real. Julian's vast fortune, which had once been the source of his paranoia about legacy and lineage, was now used to secure the future of 2 boys. The lawsuit against the Genesis Center resulted in a landmark settlement that not only provided for both families, but also led to sweeping reforms in the fertility industry nationwide. Brenda, the embryologist, faced criminal charges and lost her license, a tragic figure in a drama she had single-handedly created. One crisp autumn afternoon, About a year later, the four parents were at a local park. David was pushing Matteo on the swings, his laughter echoing in the air. Julian was on a bench with Isabella, watching Maria teach Daniel how to walk, his chubby legs wobbling with determination. "Do you ever think about the life we were supposed to have?" Isabella asked quietly, not with regret, but with a gentle curiosity. Julian watched his biological son take a triumphant step into Maria's arms. Then he looked at Matteo, the boy he had once rejected, soaring toward the sky on the swing. "The life we were supposed to have was based on a flawed algorithm," he said. "It was based on the idea that everything could be controlled, predicted. That love followed lines of code. This," he gestured to the beautiful, chaotic scene before them. "This is better. This is real." He hadn't found the simple truth he had been looking for, but he had found a better one. Family wasn't about data or DNA. It was about the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of love loss and the incredible unexpected grace of second chances. 5 years later, the rhythm of their life had settled into a steady, unconventional beat. The duplex in Park Slope was no longer a radical experiment, but simply home. The lawns were worn down by the ceaseless energy of 2 6-year-old boys, and the fence between the properties had long since been replaced by a wide, welcoming gate. Matteo and Daniel were in the same first-grade class, a fact that had initially raised eyebrows at the school, but was now accepted much like the presence of 4 parents at every school event. They were inseparable, a whirlwind of shared secrets and scraped knees fiercely protective of each other. Daniel had Julian's sharp, analytical eyes and David's steady demeanor. Matteo had Maria's artistic flair and Isabella's passionate heart. The challenge they were discovering came not from within their carefully constructed world, but from the outside. It arrived in the form of a parent-teacher conference with a young, well-meaning teacher named Miss Albright. The 4 of them, Isabella, Julian, Maria, and David, sat on child-sized chairs, a familiar, slightly comical sight. "They are wonderful boys." Miss Albright began smiling warmly. "Bright kind, and Daniel is a natural leader, while Matteo is so wonderfully creative, and their bond is just remarkable. But a question came up during our Families Week that I wanted to discuss with you all." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We were making family trees." Daniel drew a large oak tree with 4 main branches. When another student asked why he had 2 mums and 2 dads, Daniel just said, "Because my brother and I share." It was beautiful, but I sense the deeper questions are starting to form. After the conference, they gathered at their usual spot, a small cafe around the corner. The air between them was comfortable, forged through years of shared bedtimes, fevers, and birthday parties. "I knew the family tree project would be a landmine," David said, stirring his coffee. He was the rock, the one who always seemed to know the right simple thing to say. "But because we share, that's a good kid." Maria looked at Isabella, a silent communication passing between them that only they could understand. It was a look that acknowledged the phantom pain that sometimes surfaced on quiet nights, the ghost of a different life. "I worry about the day. Because we share isn't enough." Isabella confessed, her voice soft. "The day someone is cruel about it. Kids can be." It was Julian who responded, and his words surprised them all. "And we'll teach them that cruelty comes from ignorance. We'll teach them that our family isn't fragile. It's the opposite. It was built by choice. It was designed." He looked around the table. "Most families happen by default. Ours was a conscious decision, made by 4 people who chose love over anger and connection over biology. That makes it stronger, not weaker. The cold, data-driven CEO was gone, replaced by a man who had learned a different kind of logic. The logic of the heart. He was still a billionaire, still a force in the tech world, but his priorities had been fundamentally rewritten. His greatest project was no longer his company. It was this complex, sprawling, beautiful family. Later that evening, the truth of his words was put to the test. Isabella was tucking Matteo into bed. Mommy Matteo asked, his dark eyes serious. "Am I from your tummy?" Isabella's heart clenched, but she met his gaze without flinching. This was the moment they had all prepared for. "You grew in my tummy, sweetheart," she said, stroking his hair. "I carried you and kept you safe, and I was the very first person to hold you. And Mama Maria, her heart wanted you so much. She's your mum, too. You're the luckiest boy in the world." At the exact same time, in the apartment below, Daniel asked David a similar question. "Dad, why do I look like Uncle Julian?" David sat on the edge of the bed and pulled his son into a hug. "Well, buddy, the recipe to make you used a little bit from Uncle Julian and a little bit from Mum Isabella. But the ones who get to be your dad and Mum raising you and loving you every day, that's me and Mama. Maria. We won the lottery with you." It was their shared narrative. Simple, honest, and anchored in love. Later, from his apartment across the street, Julian stood at his window, a familiar ritual. He looked at the duplex, a warm beacon of light in the Brooklyn night. He could see the silhouettes moving inside, 2 families intertwined. He was no longer the lonely king in a glass castle. He was a vital part of a thriving, messy human ecosystem. He had lost a wife and a life he thought he wanted, but he had gained 2 sons and a definition of family more robust and meaningful than any algorithm could have ever predicted. The truth hadn't set him free in the way he'd expected. Instead, it had bound him to these people, to this life, in the most profound and unexpected way imaginable. And for the first time in his life, Julian Croft felt truly, completely rich. The incredible story of Julian Isabella and the Garcia family is a harrowing reminder that truth is often stranger and far more complex than fiction. They were thrust into an impossible situation, forced to confront the very definition of what it means to be a parent. What defines a family? Is it the blood that runs through our veins, or the unconditional love poured into a child day after day? Their journey didn't end with a simple answer or a neat resolution, but with the creation of something new, messy and profoundly beautiful. A family bound not by convention, but by an unbreakable shared love for 2 little boys. They chose love over law and connection, over biology, teaching us all that the human heart's capacity for love is the most powerful force of all. If this story of heartbreak mystery and the complex modern definition of family moved you, please honor their journey by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who appreciates a gripping, real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable stories that challenge our understanding of the world. The winter wind bit through her threadbare coat, but Sarah Donovan barely noticed. Strolling past neon-lit windows, she couldn't ignore the relentless ache in her belly, an ache caused by hunger and the 6-month child she carried. Shivering on the sidewalk, she glanced up at a massive TV screen, blaring the nightly financial news. There, beaming under the bright studio lights, was a man she once promised to love forever. William Donovan, her husband, a multimillionaire, famous, admired, while she trembled in the cold. Her heart twisted. How had their world turned so cruel? She had nothing, and he seemed to have it all. Sarah Donovan had known hunger before, but never like this. On that frigid evening, the wind seemed to slice through layers of her clothing directly into her bones. She pulled the sides of her coat together in a desperate attempt to keep warm. Through the swirling snowflakes, she could just make out the bright flashing monitors in Times Square. On the largest screen, a familiar face, William Donovan, appeared. His name scrolled in large letters. Tech Investor of the Year. Applause thundered behind him in the recorded clip. Brightly lit, he was addressing a hall filled with wealth power and cameras from CNN, CNBC, and local networks. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. That face, the strong jaw, the slight smile that once reassured her everything would be all right. Now he looked polished, exuding confidence. She hadn't seen him in person for almost a year. Her chest clenched with memories of the day he walked out, arguments about money and ambition overshadowing their love. She'd tried to reason with him to support him, but each conversation ended in a new fight, culminating in the shocking decision he would succeed alone. The flickering billboard cut to a montage of images, William shaking hands with Mark Cuban at a tech conference, then introducing a pioneering piece of software in Silicon Valley. Sarah saw glimpses of glamorous parties William in a tailored tuxedo, accompanied by men and women she had never met. The talk show host concluded the segment by proclaiming, "William Donovan, America's newest business sensation." Then the screen blinked to a car commercial. Just like that, he vanished into the night. Sarah blinked back tears. There was a time William's arms had been her warm refuge, promising they'd face every storm side by side. And now, pregnant with his child, she walked alone on icy sidewalks, scrounging for a place to sleep. She was determined not to cry, but her emotions overwhelmed her as she gazed up at the ironically beautiful Christmas lights decorating the city. By all appearances, the world around her was celebrating, and she was surviving. Barely. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, feeling the slightest kick. "I'll take care of you," she whispered to the life inside her. It was a promise she intended to keep, though at that moment she wasn't sure how. When she turned away from the screen and stumbled onward, her foot snagged on a piece of broken pavement. A stinging pain shot through her ankle, and she nearly collapsed. She bit down a cry, scanning the crowd for help, but passers-by, preoccupied with their own rush of errands and holiday shopping, scarcely gave her a glance. That's what life had become after she left the small studio in which she and William once lived, alone, invisible. Sarah's pride was bruised, but she refused to crumble. She passed by a bakery. Through the window, the smell of fresh bread made her stomach twist. She had to preserve her last dollar for the cheapest motel, a place with peeling wallpaper and barely functioning plumbing, but at least it was indoors. She stepped inside, bought a small roll and devoured it in 3 bites. Outside again, the wind roared, intensifying the city's clamor. Still clutching her abdomen, she decided that tomorrow everything had to change. She would find a job. She'd scour the city for help. She would not let her child enter this world with nothing but sorrow. But for tonight, she needed a place to rest, a place that wasn't some abandoned corner or shadowed alley. Even if it cost her last few dollars, she had to prioritize the safety of the life inside her. As Sarah walked away from the mesmerizing screens of Times Square, one thought pulsed in her mind. Her husband, the man she had once loved beyond reason, was thriving. And here she was, pregnant and alone. could the chasm between them grow any wider? Long before he was the darling of business magazines and tech summits, William Donovan was a daydreamer writing code in the corner of the local university library. Sarah remembered the first time she saw him. It was her sophomore year, and she was majoring in English literature at Columbia. The library's back table had been her favorite spot, quiet, perfect for reading. She noticed him a junior in computer science, leaning over a laptop with an exasperated scowl. Curious and drawn by the intellectual frenzy in his eyes, she'd asked, "Need any help?" Although Sarah barely understood advanced programming, the question sparked the first real conversation they ever had. William's exhausted face broke into the shyest of smiles, and she recalled thinking, "He's kind of cute under all that stress." They chatted about his class project, an algorithm for data compression. Sarah confessed she was more comfortable discussing Shakespeare than software, and he teased her gently. From that moment on, they were a constant presence in each other's lives. Their connection seemed effortless. He awakened her interest in technology's potential. She introduced him to literary classics, weaving in metaphors about love and ambition. They started dating by Christmas break of that year. With sweet, simple moments, late-night walks around campus, scrounging for cheap coffee in the student lounge, trying out new ramen spots around Manhattan. They were two dreamers, William longing to found a tech startup that would revolutionize how people shared data, and Sarah hoping to become a novelist. The future seemed limitless. She could still feel the way he used to grasp her hand whenever she doubted herself, as if to say, "We'll get through anything." Yet as graduation approached, financial stresses haunted them. William, determined to compete in the tech world, pitched his software to small investors, but faced constant rejection. Sarah, meanwhile, struggled to get traction for her short stories, or even land a decent internship. Their families offered little financial support. William's parents, proud owners of a modest real estate business in upstate New York, expected him to follow a more traditional path and often expressed skepticism toward his entrepreneurial obsession. Sarah's mother, whose chronic illness drained the family's savings, couldn't help beyond a few encouraging phone calls. When they got married in a humble civil ceremony right after graduation, they were brimming with hope. Their honeymoon was a short weekend, spent in a budget motel near Niagara Falls, the only getaway they could afford. But they didn't care. What mattered was their shared devotion. They returned to New York City, renting a cheap studio apartment in Queens. William coded into the late hours, while Sarah worked as a barista by day and scribbled short stories by night. Their love burned like a bright flame until cracks began to form. William became consumed with success, obsessed, really. Each failed pitch to an investor sent him into a silent downward spiral that led to outbursts. Sarah tried to reassure him that failure was part of the journey, but her optimism only irritated him. As months dragged on, the bills piled up. William grew desperate, dabbling in risky deals with shady angel investors. They had endless arguments about money. When success finally arrived nearly 2 years into their marriage, with a major investor, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, buying into William's new software idea, Sarah hoped that would ease the tension. But ironically, it only magnified their differences. William was suddenly thrust into corporate meetings, traveling across the country, networking with high-profile entrepreneurs. Invitations to flashy events replaced their quiet dinners. He no longer came home with cheap takeout. He was gone most nights, presumably in boardrooms or at fancy parties. Sarah felt him slipping away. A year passed in that swirl of success, and Sarah was left behind, often alone, in their now upscale condo near Central Park. William's time was devoured by business calls and conferences on the West Coast. When he was home, he was distracted, fidgety, unwilling to share stories of his day. She remembered their final argument vividly. She'd asked him to spend one evening with her to reconnect. He retorted that she had no clue how hard he worked to keep them afloat, how she should be more grateful. That night ended with William storming out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. He never came back. Days became weeks. Sarah's calls and texts went unanswered. Soon bank notices arrived explaining how William had switched all joint accounts to his name alone. Sarah had no income. Worse yet, 2 months later, she discovered she was pregnant. Fear overrode any bitterness, but desperation set in. Rent soared, her barista job didn't pay enough, and she could no longer afford the condo. Before long, she was forced onto the street. She tried contacting William's PR office, but the line always went to a polite assistant who left her on hold until she hung up in frustration. Now, witnessing his face on the giant screen in Times Square, that entire whirlwind of a past threatened to engulf her. She reminded herself of one vow she'd made, standing in that battered apartment with an eviction notice in hand. I will survive and protect this child. If the father refused to care, she would find a way. She would not become just another nameless tragedy in the city's underbelly. Morning brought little relief from the cold. Sarah woke on a narrow, squeaky bed in the cheapest motel she could find. The heater rattled uselessly, barely keeping the air above freezing. She had about $15, left enough for a couple of cheap sandwiches, maybe bus fare if she wanted to head to the next shelter. But Sarah was stubborn. She believed there had to be something better. She packed her meager belongings, a change of clothes, her worn copy of Emily Dickinson's poems, a phone with a cracked screen that almost never picked up a signal. Everything fit into a single bag. Every step outside felt like walking through a wind tunnel. She knew she had to find help soon. A pregnant woman living on the streets was a tragedy waiting to happen. She headed to the nearest public library, an older building with classical columns, seeking warmth and free internet to look for job openings. Inside, near the community bulletin board, she found a flyer advertising a free women's shelter in Brooklyn. It promised hot meals counseling and prenatal support. She tore off the address tab. This might be my best chance, she thought, shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time in days. She hopped on a bus, ignoring the pitying looks from a couple of other passengers. Upon arrival, she found the shelter nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The building was large, with peeling paint and sagging steps, but the warmth she felt when she walked inside was immediate and comforting. A friendly volunteer named Rebecca greeted her with a kind smile. After scribbling her name on a form, Sarah was shown to a cramped but clean room shared with 3 other women. Each cot had fresh blankets and a small side table. Meals are served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening, Rebecca explained. We also have prenatal checkups every Friday with a visiting nurse from Bellevue Hospital. Sarah nearly cried with relief. A medical checkup was a blessing. She hadn't seen a doctor since learning of her pregnancy. Rebecca chatted with her for a while, asking about her situation. Though Sarah felt hesitant to reveal too much, there was something about Rebecca's gentle nature that encouraged honesty. She admitted her husband had left, that he was well off, and that she had nowhere else to go. Rebecca listened, never judging, then simply patted Sarah's shoulder. You'll be safe here. You'll get back on your feet. I'm here if you need anything, Rebecca offered. Those words of encouragement did more for Sarah's spirit than anything had in months. That first night in the shelter, Sarah lay in the dark, hearing the muffled snores of her roommates. She felt a faint flutter within her baby moving. I'm not alone, she reminded herself. This life inside her gave her purpose. She recalled an old Emily Dickinson line. She loved something about hope being a thing with feathers. That hope had perched in her soul, refusing to abandon her even in life's darkest corners. The next morning she joined the breakfast queue. The food wasn't luxurious oatmeal, a banana-powdered orange juice, but it was warm and nourishing. Some of the residents eyed her suspiciously. They were all at different points in life's struggles, yet in their gazes, Sarah sensed a silent camaraderie that had been missing in her life for so long. As she sat down to eat, Rebecca joined her. We have a job support program, Rebecca said, her voice quiet. You'd get help writing a resume, searching for openings, maybe training. I know it can be tough to find something with no stable address, but we can try. Sarah nodded eagerly. That would be great, she replied, swallowing a surge of gratitude. She was ready to do anything office cleaning retail, anything that would help her earn enough for a deposit on a small apartment. But as she scrolled through job listings later that day, a rerun of a business show played on the shelter's TV in the lounge. They were discussing William Donovan again. A celebrity investor, Mark Cuban, had praised William's entrepreneurial drive, suggesting he was the future of American tech. Hearing the news anchor casually mention her husband's name felt like a punch to the gut. He was more successful than she'd even imagined. She took a deep breath, forced herself to look away from the screen and told herself, this is my life now, and I'm not giving up. She wasn't sure if she hated him, missed him, or simply wished none of this had happened. All she knew was that she had to survive, and she would on her own terms. At precisely 9 in the morning the following Friday, Sarah waited in a makeshift exam room set up in the shelter's converted rec hall. Worn curtains partitioned the space. The volunteer nurse, Ms. Francis, bustled in, setting down a bag of medical supplies. She was a short, no-nonsense woman with bright, reassuring eyes. How are you feeling, dear? Ms. Francis asked, washing her hands and snapping on latex gloves. Sarah hesitated. She had been ignoring the dull ache in her lower back, the bouts of nausea that still came and went, and the constant exhaustion. Better now that I have a safe place to sleep, she admitted. Ms. Francis nodded, taking Sarah's vitals, measuring her belly, and listening carefully with a Doppler for the baby's heartbeat. The rhythmic whoosh whoosh filled the air, and Sarah's eyes grew misty. This was the first time she'd heard her child's heartbeat. So strong, she thought, pressing a hand to her mouth. No major concerns right now, Ms. Francis informed, giving a small smile. But you need to be mindful of your diet. Get as much protein and healthy foods as you can. And rest. Stress can harm the baby too. Sarah almost laughed bitterly. Stress was the only thing she had in abundance. But she forced a bright nod. Ms. Francis noted that Sarah would need a formal medical file at a hospital soon in case of early labor or complications. We'll coordinate that, Ms. Francis added. In the meantime, do you have any support person for prenatal care? A family member or, her voice trailed. My husband's. Not around, Sarah said, swallowing a lump in her throat. No other family in the city. The nurse's expression turned sympathetic. Well, you're not alone. We're here to help. After the checkup, Sarah felt slightly more confident. The baby was healthy. That knowledge was the anchor she clung to. She spent her afternoons in the job support program, brushing up her typing skills, practicing interview responses with a counselor named Janet. Her English degree helped. She applied for positions as a receptionist, an editorial assistant, or even a part-time tutor. Most responses came back negative. Employers didn't want someone with an unstable address or they required advanced certifications. But Sarah persevered. Days turned into weeks. The bulge in her belly became more pronounced, and so did the heaviness in her heart. She tried to keep track of the outside world, scanning newspapers in the library for job ads, occasionally glimpsing headlines about William Donovan's skyrocketing success. One day the paper featured a photograph of him leaving a high-end restaurant with a tall, elegant woman wearing designer clothes. The photo caption labeled her as Madeline Ashford, potential new business partner. Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced at her own reflection in the library window. Rumpled coat eyes ringed with fatigue. If William had moved on personally, was she even a memory? That evening her back pains grew sharper, and she realized with dread that her pregnancy was entering a stage where she would soon need consistent medical care. She couldn't keep skipping checkups or rely solely on the shelter nurse. She also worried about finances, diapers, baby clothes, a crib. Where would she get them? She'd joined a waiting list for government assistance, but bureaucracy moved at a snail's pace. Sarah found herself weeping some nights, the future an ominous shadow. Yet each morning she recalled the baby's heartbeat, reminding herself there was no choice but forward. One particularly cold day, she forced herself to walk 3 miles in the slushy streets to follow up on a potential receptionist position. She arrived soaked and shivering. Her hopes rose when the manager, a kindly older woman, offered a temporary role answering phones at a small publishing company. The pay was minimal, but it was something. She'd start Monday. Sarah left the office hugging a folder of paperwork and feeling a glimmer of pride. I'm making progress. When she returned to the shelter, though, she found Rebecca pale-faced in the hallway. We need to talk, Rebecca said quietly, leading Sarah to a corner. Apparently an acquaintance of Sarah's had come by looking for her, a man with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit. He left a business card that read, Donovan Enterprises. Sarah's heart hammered. She stared at the card, the swirling black and gold letters. Did he say anything she managed to ask? Just that he needed to speak with you regarding a personal matter. Sarah's mind whirled. Could it be William's lawyer? One of his personal aides? Did William know she was pregnant? She never thought he would actually search for her. A swirl of anger, fear, and a strange residual hope filled her. She resolved to call the number. Maybe it was finally time for a confrontation, a reckoning. She just didn't know what to expect. Sarah picked up a battered pay-as-you-go phone, a small victory from the shelter's resource program, and stared at the business card. It bore a name, Charles Whitmore, Legal Counsel. She dialed with trembling fingers, listening to the ring on the other end. Anxiety swelled. Finally, a crisp male voice answered. Charles Whitmore speaking. This is Sarah Donovan. You left your card at the shelter. Her voice sounded small. He cleared his throat. Ah, Mrs. Donovan. I'm glad you reached out. Mr. Donovan, your husband would like to set up a meeting. It's in regard to finances and certain changes to his estate. A chill ran down her spine. Was this about a divorce? She almost panicked at the thought, but she maintained composure. Why now? She asked. The question came out bitterly. Ma'am, I only have instructions to coordinate your meeting. Could you come by the Donovan Enterprises office downtown on 5th Avenue? Sarah hesitated. I can't. Not immediately. She had a job orientation. Soon she had no decent clothes and no money for a taxi. Shall we say, next Tuesday at noon? He pressed. We'd be happy to reimburse your transportation. Mr. Donovan understands how difficult the city can be. He specifically requested you meet in a neutral setting." Sarah's anger flared at the paternalistic tone, but caution prevailed. "All right. Tuesday." She hung up, heart thudding. William wants to meet. Part of her raged that he would drag her into some legal affair after all this time. Another part, small yet insistent, felt relief that maybe he would acknowledge their baby, maybe do the right thing, and at least provide child support. Tuesday came quickly, and Sarah found herself rummaging through the shelter's donated clothing closet, picking out a modest black dress and a coat that fit snugly over her belly. Rebecca offered to do her hair in a simple bun. As she left, 6 women in the shelter wished her luck, though they knew only that she was meeting her ex. The Donovan Enterprises office towered over 5th Avenue with mirrored glass windows. Sarah approached it anxiously, ignoring the doorman's raised eyebrow when she walked in. The marble-floored lobby gleamed, and well-dressed professionals hurried past, exuding an air of wealth. A statue of William's trademark D logo was on display near the elevators, a testament to his success. Charles Whitmore, a tall, slim man with graying hair, emerged from behind the reception area and greeted her with a polite bow. "Mrs. Donovan." "Right this way," he said, leading her to a plush conference room overlooking the city skyline. Soft leather chairs, a polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Central Park. Everything screamed opulence. She perched on a chair, feeling out of place. Moments later, the door opened. In walked William Donovan. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and stepped forward with a hesitant smile. Sarah's throat constricted at the sight of him. He looked the same, yet different, older, more confident. She stood instinctively, placing a protective hand on her abdomen. If he noticed her rounded belly, he didn't show any immediate reaction. "Sarah," he said quietly, as though testing the word. He paused, his eyes flicking to her stomach, then back to her face. "Thank you for coming. I didn't realize you were, are you?" She inhaled sharply. "Pregnant," she finished. "Yes. For nearly 6 months." A fleeting expression of shock, maybe guilt, flashed in his eyes. "I didn't know," he said. You didn't tell me." Anger boiled in her. "I tried. You cut all contact. You walked out. And..." Her voice trembled. She clenched her fists. "You were too busy with your empire to pick up the phone." He exhaled, looking pained. "I'm sorry. I truly am." He sank into the chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. "I messed up. I realize that now. I've been going through a lot, but it's no excuse." She eyed him warily, uncertain if this was genuine remorse or a performance. "So why am I here?" "Did you need me to sign divorce papers? Is that it?" William shook his head vigorously. No. That's not it at all." He looked at Charles, who stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Donovan asked me to assist in drafting an arrangement to provide you with financial support, enough to cover all prenatal care, childbirth expenses, and living costs. In addition, there's a trust fund he'd like to establish for the child." Sarah felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that there was some practical solution, indignation that he thought money alone could fix everything, and a flicker of hope. "What about us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Our marriage?" William gazed at her, eyes clouded. "I want to help you. And our child. I know I can't change the past, but I can at least do right by you now." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "As for us, Sarah, I can't pretend I haven't caused terrible damage. I don't expect you to forgive me instantly." But maybe with time, she wasn't sure how to respond. It felt like they were strangers. She realized she was trembling. He's acknowledging the child, she told herself. That was step one. Charles laid out documents referencing monthly allowances coverage for medical bills, etc. The amounts were staggering. Sarah had never seen such figures. She could live comfortably, rent an apartment, and never worry about basic needs again. But guilt gnawed at her. Should she accept this? She eyed William, her voice wavering. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not?" Before William's face was taut. "When I saw you disappeared from our condo and heard rumors you were struggling, I tried to locate you, but I was overwhelmed with expansions, new deals, then the pandemic of responsibilities. I kept putting it off." He inhaled, pained. "That was wrong. I realized I couldn't move forward, knowing you might be suffering. You deserved better." "Damn right I did," Sarah muttered, tears burning her eyes. She glanced at the legal documents. They were a band-aid solution. Maybe it was an answer for the baby. Yet a single question lingered. Could William Donovan possibly be part of my life again? She didn't sign anything that day, telling Charles she needed time to think. William offered to call her a car, but she declined, wanting to walk back to the shelter to clear her head. He handed her a card with his personal cell number, the only item that felt remotely intimate. She left the grand building uncertain whether she was stepping toward salvation or heartbreak. That evening, Sarah returned to the shelter in a daze. She found Rebecca in the kitchen, dishing out bowls of soup to the residents. Feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her, Sarah pulled Rebecca aside and recounted the surreal encounter with William Donovan. She showed her the paperwork, baffling sums of money that could turn her life around. "That's... wow," Rebecca breathed, flipping through the pages. "I've never seen so many zeros on a support agreement." She paused. "So what are you going to do?" Sarah sighed, sinking into a chair. "I don't know. Part of me feels like taking this money is the only logical choice. The baby deserves a stable life, not a mother stuck in a shelter. But another part," she rubbed her belly. "I'm scared he's just trying to buy off his conscience. If I sign, do I lose my dignity?" Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "It's not about dignity, Sarah. It's about providing for your child and yourself. You've sacrificed so much. You deserve some security. That doesn't mean you have to let him back in your life unless you want to." Those words calmed Sarah slightly, but her mind remained unsettled. She recalled her once blazing love with William, how they'd giggle over cheap pizza late at night, how she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder while he read his code aloud. Is that man still in there, beneath the polished millionaire facade, she wondered. A part of her yearned for closure or even a chance at reconciliation. But the hurt was fresh, the betrayal still raw. The baby's well-being, however, was paramount. That same night, she carefully reviewed the documents, scribbling notes and questions in the margins, wanting to ensure she wasn't signing away any rights inadvertently. If William was sincere in his remorse, maybe she could start by accepting financial support, then see if anything else could be salvaged later. She set the papers aside, resolved to meet with Charles again in a few days. Meanwhile, Sarah's new part-time receptionist job started. She commuted by bus, then hopped the subway to a modest building in Midtown, stepping into the small publishing house. The environment was busy, yet casual stacks of manuscripts, coffee mugs on every desk, editors arguing about grammar. On her first day, she answered phones, directed visitors, and fetched coffee for staff meetings. By lunchtime, she was exhausted, but a gentle wave of triumph swelled inside her. "I'm working. I'm making strides." During a brief break, she scrolled her phone and saw a new message from William. "Please let me know if you have any questions about the agreement. Also, I hope you're doing well." That was all. So formal, yet tinged with a cautious warmth. Sarah stared at the screen, unsure how to reply, eventually typing a short, "I'm still thinking. I'm safe. Thanks." She pressed send. Her heart hammered, but she forced herself to focus on her tasks. Over the following week, she gradually came to a decision. She agreed to sign the financial support arrangement, but made it clear to Charles Whitmore in an email that she didn't want William controlling her life. She insisted on having her own apartment in her own name, a modest but comfortable place near the shelter, so she could remain in the supportive environment until she felt truly stable. She also wanted the freedom to make medical and personal decisions for the baby. If William truly wanted to be involved, they could discuss visitation and co-parenting later. To her astonishment, William agreed to all of it, no arguments. He forwarded a preliminary lease for a small 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, the rent fully paid for a year. Sarah felt a surge of relief. He's taking responsibility, she thought. Maybe there was a shred of the old William left. But was she ready for more than just a transactional arrangement? Late one night, cradling the phone, she impulsively dialed his personal number. He picked up immediately, sounding anxious. "Sarah." She swallowed. "I just wanted to say thank you," she managed, "for the help." Silence filled the line, then a soft exhale. "Of course. It's the least I can do." Her voice trembled. "This baby, William, it's ours. He or she deserves 2 parents who at least respect each other." He murmured, "I'd like that. I'd like to earn your respect again. And maybe one day, your forgiveness." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She remembered how once, years ago, they could share entire nights, simply talking, dreaming. She had so many questions for him: why he abandoned her, what truly motivated his success, whether there was any love left. But for now, she whispered, "Good night, William," and ended the call. By the time Sarah was entering her 7th month of pregnancy, her life looked drastically different. With William's financial support, she moved into the small but cozy apartment. The walls were painted a cheerful cream color, and there was an extra room she planned to turn into a nursery. The furniture was minimal, just a sofa, a bed, and a kitchen table, but it was hers. Her name was on the lease. Her job at the publishing house had also become slightly more secure. The manager recognized her punctuality and diligence. They offered her an extended contract for another 3 months. With the baby coming, Sarah wasn't sure how long she could keep working, but at least she had some sense of purpose each day. She'd found a routine that made her feel human again. Wake up, check on emails, go to work, come home. Set aside half an hour to jot down story ideas and then rest. She still visited the shelter occasionally, volunteering to help with new arrivals, offering them a spark of hope in the same way Rebecca had done for her. One chilly afternoon, Sarah heard a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find William standing there, holding a small bouquet of lilies and a bag of groceries. Her heart pounded as she took in his hesitant smile. "I was in the neighborhood," he explained. "Thought I'd stop by." if that's okay. Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told him her exact address Charles must have. She had been careful with boundaries, not wanting to feel controlled, but she found herself nodding, stepping aside to let him in. He handed her the flowers, which she placed in a vase on the kitchen table. "I brought some things," he said, lifting the grocery bag. "Fresh fruit, vitamins, and a new jacket for you. The weather's getting colder." The gesture caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed, smoothing her hand over her growing belly. His eyes flicked to the apartment, taking in the bare walls and modest furnishings. "It's nice, cozy," he remarked, trying to fill the silence. He glanced at her abdomen again, then back at her face. "May I ask, do you know the baby's gender?" She shook her head. "I want it to be a surprise," she said softly. "That's wonderful." William looked down, fiddling with the bag. Finally, he exhaled. "Sarah, I know showing up like this might be too forward. I'm trying to respect your space, but I'd also like to be more involved. I want to help with the doctor appointments, the nursery, anything you need." She studied him, noticing a sincerity in his gaze that hadn't been there during their last tumultuous months together. Why the sudden change, she asked. She recalled the humiliating nights she spent on the streets, clinging to her coat for warmth, while he mingled with venture capitalists. William's shoulders sagged. "When I left, I was consumed by my ambition, believing I couldn't handle a relationship. I was terrified of failing. I did fail you in the worst way. Then once success arrived, I felt emptier than ever. All I had was money, status, and a hollow sense of accomplishment." He paused, voice raw. "I realize now that none of it matters, without love, without people who truly care about you. I guess I'm trying to atone for that. I can't change the past, but I can try to be here now." Tears prickled Sarah's eyes. The sincerity in his voice shook her. "I appreciate the honesty," she said slowly. She wondered if it was real or if guilt simply propelled him now that she was visibly pregnant and vulnerable. Yet a part of her, the part that remembered how they'd once dreamed side by side, wanted to believe him. "Would you like some tea?" she offered, gesturing to the kettle on the stove. He nodded gratefully. The two of them settled at the tiny kitchen table, sipping tea amidst the silence. The city traffic hummed outside. Neither knew how to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage in one afternoon, but at least they were there, trying. After a while, William cleared his throat. "I'd like to take you to your next prenatal appointment," he said. "If you'll let me. I can drive or we can get a car. Whatever you prefer." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That would be nice." Deep down, a small flicker of warmth lit her heart, something akin to hope. William accompanied Sarah to her next prenatal appointment at Bellevue Hospital. Miss Francis, the shelter nurse who volunteered there, greeted them warmly, but Sarah noticed the curious glances from staff members. She imagined they recognized William. His face was plastered across business headlines. Yet to his credit, he didn't flaunt his status. He simply held Sarah's coat while she changed into a gown and asked the doctor thoughtful questions about the baby's development. They heard the baby's heartbeat again, steady and reassuring. William's expression softened, and Sarah saw tears in his eyes. A powerful wave of emotion struck her. It was the first tangible moment she realized he truly cared about the child. On their way out, he placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her through the bustling hallway. She allowed the small gesture, longing for closeness, yet keeping her guard up. In the hospital lobby, they unexpectedly bumped into a familiar face, Barbara Donovan Williams' mother. Her short silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a designer coat. She froze upon spotting her son with Sarah. "William," she exclaimed. Then her gaze flicked to Sarah's round belly, and her eyes narrowed. "I heard rumors, but I thought you two were done." Sarah instinctively braced herself. She recalled the tension with her mother-in-law, who never quite warmed to her. Barbara had always found subtle ways to criticize Sarah's family background and modest means. She also blamed Sarah for distracting William from more important ambitions. William squared his shoulders. "Mother, this is Sarah. My wife. She's pregnant with our child." Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. "So you're reconciling?" she asked, voice laced with disapproval. Sarah couldn't hold back. "I wouldn't call it that," she said quietly. "We're trying to figure things out, at least for the baby's sake." Barbara sniffed disdainfully. "William, you have far too many responsibilities to let old mistakes drag you down." She eyed Sarah as if she were an intruder. "Why didn't you tell him you were pregnant sooner?" A flame of anger rose in Sarah. "I tried. He left, and I had no way to reach him. And trust me, I wouldn't call carrying your grandchild a mistake." William gently took his mother's arm. "Enough, Mother. The baby is my responsibility, and I won't have you speak to Sarah that way. We're not discussing this here in a hospital lobby." Barbara sniffed again. "We'll talk later, William." She glared at Sarah with thinly veiled contempt, then turned on her heel and walked away. Heart-pounding, Sarah noticed people staring. She blinked back tears, humiliated by the confrontation. William's jaw was tight. "I'm sorry." "She had no right to talk to you like that," he said softly. But Sarah's mind raced. She recalled how Barbara had once told her she wasn't good enough for William, that he needed a partner more on his level. Now wealthy and successful, William's family clearly saw Sarah as an obstacle. "It's fine," she muttered, though her trembling hands said otherwise. "I'll manage." They walked outside, the crisp air hitting their faces. William turned to her. "Please don't let her get to you. She doesn't speak for me." Sarah found her resolve. "I won't. But if we're going to co-parent, I need to know you'll stand by me, not be swayed by your mother's opinions." He nodded, eyes earnest. "I promise." Though his promise felt genuine, Sarah couldn't ignore the chill left by the confrontation. She remembered the nights when William's mother belittled her for dreaming of being a writer, for lacking financial security. Would that negativity poison their child's life too? Or had William grown enough to shield his new family from it? Only time would tell. On the drive back to Sarah's apartment, the tension was palpable. William tried to make small talk about the baby's due date, about nursery decor. But Sarah was lost in her thoughts. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted quietly, "My mother was always controlling. Part of why I left was because I felt suffocated by her expectations, by the pressure of success. I let that overshadow you and me. I'm sorry." Sarah clutched her seatbelt. "What's done is done," she said, voice steady. "Let's just focus on the future, on doing right by this baby. That's all that matters." Inside, though, her emotions churned. Could we really have a future together, she wondered? Or is it just going to be co-parenting with a man I once loved? At her apartment, he walked her to the door. "Call me if you need anything," he said softly. She nodded, uncertain if she'd ever be ready to let him fully back into her life. The final weeks of Sarah's pregnancy arrived with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Her belly felt enormous, every movement an effort. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a blend of excitement and anxiety about the impending birth. William visited regularly, bringing supplies, maternity clothes, organic food, baby items. They spoke about practicalities, pediatricians, childcare options, possible names. Yet the question of their relationship remained unresolved. At times, they fell into an unexpected closeness, sharing a laugh at a tiny onesie with silly prints reminiscing about their college days. In those moments, Sarah glimpsed the man she fell in love with, his eyes warm and tender. But the memory of abandonment always lurked. She couldn't easily forget sleeping on sidewalks, shivering in the winter cold, all while he soared to stardom. Trust would not be rebuilt overnight. One evening she typed away at a short story, her old passion for writing rekindling, when a gentle knock came at the door. She opened it to find William in casual clothes holding a large container of homemade soup. "You mentioned in passing that you craved chicken soup," he said, smiling sheepishly. "I asked my personal chef to make a batch." "Don't worry, I didn't cook it myself. That would be disastrous." Sarah's laughter slipped out before she could stop it. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He set the container down, noticing her manuscript drafts scattered across the table. "Are you writing again?" She blushed, nodding. "Just trying to get the creative juices flowing. Something for me, you know, to find myself again." He asked if he could read a snippet. She hesitated, then allowed him. He read quietly, eyes darting across the page. When he finished, he looked up, an admiring expression on his face. "This is really good," he said softly. "I forgot how talented you are." She swallowed, her heart fluttering. He was praising her, not dismissing her efforts as frivolous, like he once had. "Thank you," she whispered. They talked about the story about a lone traveler who finds hope in unexpected places. The conversation flowed naturally, reminiscent of their younger selves. At one point, he gently placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. A shared smile passed between them, something both tender and uncertain. Later that night, as he left, she lingered at the door. "William," she said softly, "I just want you to know. I see you trying. I appreciate it." He exhaled, relief washing over his face. "I'll keep trying, Sarah." But the next day, chaos returned. William called her in a panic, asking her to watch the news. Another business scandal had broken out, accusations that Donovan Enterprises engaged in questionable stock trading. Rumors swirled that William's mother, Barbara, had been pulling strings behind the scenes, orchestrating backdoor deals. William's name was splashed across headlines with tabloids, speculating about the moral integrity of his entire operation. Sarah flipped on her old TV set, seeing reporters swarm in front of Donovan Enterprises. A few sensationalist channels displayed a picture of Sarah from months ago, claiming she was the estranged wife carrying the heir to a troubled empire. She felt nauseous. Was she about to be dragged into the public eye? William texted, "I'm sorry. This is out of control. I never wanted you to be involved." She fought the urge to panic, but the stress weighed heavily, and within hours, mild contractions started. She was only 36 weeks along, a bit early, but still within a safe range. The contractions weren't severe yet, but she felt them enough to know her body might be preparing for labor. She called Ms. Francis, who advised her to rest and hydrate, warning her to come to the hospital if things intensified. Night descended, and the tabloids kept spewing stories. A photo of Barbara, stern-faced, refused to speak to reporters. They insinuated that William's entire fortune could be at risk. Sarah tried not to care about money. but she worried about the baby. If Donovan Enterprises collapsed under scandal, would her child be caught in the crossfire of a messy public fiasco? When William arrived at her apartment, he looked drained, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry for the media circus," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea my mother was involved in shady trades. I've fired the people responsible, but the damage is done." Sarah tried to remain calm, but the Braxton Hicks contractions flared, causing her to wince. William noticed immediately fear flashing across his features. "Are you okay? I think—" She paused, breathing through the discomfort. "I might be in early labor." His face paled, and in that moment, all talk of scandal and business melted away. "Let's get you to the hospital," he said gently, helping her gather her things. As they hurried out, Sarah realized a new chapter was beginning. Whatever storms raged outside, she was about to bring a child into the world, and she needed William's unwavering support. Inside the maternity wing at Bellevue Hospital, time seemed to slip into a blur of fluorescent lights, medical chatter, and waves of pain. Sarah was admitted with mild contractions that by midnight turned fierce. William stayed by her side, gripping her hand through each surge. Sweating and trembling, Sarah alternated between tears and focused breathing, clinging to the promise that soon she'd hold her baby. It was a tumultuous night. At one point, the baby's heart rate dipped slightly, prompting quick action from the medical staff. Fear stabbed through Sarah. She locked eyes with William, seeing raw terror reflected there. In that moment, all bitterness faded, replaced by the realization that they both desperately wanted their child to be safe. The baby's heartbeat stabilized, and relief flowed. Hours crawled by. Finally, near dawn, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to push. Nurses coached her, encouraging her to bear down. She felt like every muscle in her body was on fire. William murmured supportive words, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. With a final guttural cry, she felt the release of pain and the sudden miraculous wail of new life. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squirming newborn. A rush of emotions seized Sarah. Love, relief, awe. She reached out trembling arms as they placed the baby on her chest. Shocked by the warmth of that tiny body, tears streamed down Sarah's face. William's eyes glistened too, a rare vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. "Welcome to the world," Sarah whispered, voice choked, pressing a kiss to the baby's wet forehead. The little girl quieted, opening her eyes for a brief second, as if trying to focus on her mother's face. Later they moved Sarah to a recovery room. William remained close, pacing the hallway, on calls to his legal team, but always returning to check on Sarah and the baby. He smiled whenever he saw them together, as though the world outside, with all its scandal and drama, had lost its power here. Barbara tried to visit, but Sarah requested only William and the medical staff be allowed in. She wasn't ready to confront her mother-in-law. Not yet. Meanwhile, word arrived that the scandal at Donovan Enterprises was being resolved. William had stepped forward, taking responsibility for corporate oversight lapses and cooperating with regulators. He was determined to repair the damage rather than hide. 2 days passed in the hospital, a whirlwind of feeding diaper changes and exhausted naps. Sarah watched William hold their daughter, marveling at how gently he cradled her. They hadn't formally picked a name. Sarah had half a dozen favorites. While gazing into her daughter's round, curious eyes, she decided on Hope. It felt fitting. This tiny baby was the embodiment of new beginnings. When discharge day came, William insisted on driving them to Sarah's apartment. He carefully carried the car seat, setting it up by the living room couch. Sarah gently unbuckled Hope, lifting her close. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet apartment, the hush broken only by soft baby sighs. "I want to make a pledge," William said, voice low. "To be here for you and Hope, always. I know I can't erase the past, but I swear I'll do everything in my power to make our future better." Sarah gazed at him, then at Hope. Her heart brimmed with a kaleidoscope of emotions: uncertainty, gratitude, a cautious desire to heal. "It won't be easy," she murmured. "We have a lot to work through, but I'd like to try." He exhaled relief, flooding his features. "We'll go at your pace. Whatever you need." She nodded, tears glimmering. Over his shoulder, she saw a reflection in the window herself, William and Hope in his arms, forming a fragile family portrait. Perhaps fate had brought them full circle. The child they created now bound them with a love that neither betrayal nor success could sever. For weeks they navigated those uncharted waters. William balanced corporate responsibilities with fatherhood, often losing track of time as he admired his sleeping daughter. Sarah slowly let her guard down, recognizing that while forgiveness would be a journey, she didn't have to walk it alone anymore. Each day, she felt stronger. Each day, baby Hope grew a reminder that life could emerge triumphant, even from heartbreak. Whether or not Sarah and William's relationship would fully mend remained to be seen. But for the first time, she believed in second chances. In a world as unpredictable as theirs, one truth shone clear: love, when nurtured, can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, from the frigid sidewalks of homelessness to the gentle warmth of a newfound family, Sarah and William's story shows that life rarely unfolds as expected, but hope can spark miracles. Their journey reminds us that every hardship carries the seed of possibility, and every broken bond can mend with genuine remorse, forgiveness, and perseverance. Thank you for joining me in this emotional roller coaster of heartache, redemption, and rebirth. If this story moved you, if you felt Sarah's struggles and found inspiration in her resilience, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support ensures we can continue creating dramatic, heartfelt stories that spark conversations and spread hope. Comment below. What part of Sarah and William's journey resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Together we celebrate love's power to heal no matter how broken the path once seemed.